It is great to welcome to the program for the first time today, Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. Governor, great to have you on the program. I appreciate it.
David, it's a pleasure to join you. It's about time.
I want to start with Colorado is a very interesting state to me. I visited many times. It's got beautiful scenery, great breweries, restaurants, blue areas, and also quite a few conservative folks. And it's an interesting state in a lot of different ways. I would love for you to give us a little bit of the lay of the land of with something like the recent tax bill as an example. What do the dynamics of Colorado lead to in terms of how such a bill is going to affect your state in terms of be it rural hospitals, be it people who are entitled to but may struggle to retain benefits that they should get? Give us a sense of how you're kind of seeing this bill.
Yeah, well, as you said, the lay of the land physically is beautiful with our mountains, our beautiful vistas, and you're welcome here anytime. The lay of the land politically, we are a diverse state politically, and we also have rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas, areas that rely on the tourism economy, ag areas. So it's really a very diverse and significant size state. So one of the big impacts of the big bad bill, or whatever you want to call it,
Yep.
is really threefold. Obviously, everywhere in the country, people will be thrown off of Medicaid. Colorado won't have the same percentages as some of the higher poverty states, which tend to be red states. They'll have the highest percentage of people that'll be thrown off of Medicaid. But like every state, will it be several 100,000 Coloradans that'll lose their coverage? The loss of the tax credits under the Affordable Care Act means that in the exchange for everybody who buys their own health care, doesn't get it from an employer, rates will go up about 28% next year in January. I don't know where that's taxed nationally, David, but probably we could be in the middle. A lot of states will be more. It just sort of depends. But obviously, the loss of those tax credits is devastating. The final impact, and this is across rural America, is really how many of our rural hospitals will even be viable given the loss in Medicaid rolls, given the increase in cost in the exchange. When some people have a 20% increase, they're going to choose to go uninsured as a result because they can't afford that. And so we will be struggling with a lot of the same issues across rural Colorado that other states are that have rural areas. These are hospitals that we're barely able to get by as it is. And if we lose them, it means people will have to travel hundreds of miles just to get basic care.
I'm curious what you expect from Republican legislators that represent Colorado who voted for this bill. But as we sometimes see in American politics, then they show up in their districts and they take credit or attempt to take credit for initiatives that they did not vote for in Washington, D.C. Maybe they're put in place at the state level. Maybe they're put in place by a governor. You know, maybe I'm thinking of people in particular. Maybe I'm not. But how much political concern do you have aside from just doing the best possible things for the people of the state with those who are going to DC and voting one way and then wanting to come back home to Colorado and say, "Hey, thank me for this thing" at a ribbon cutting or whatever the case may be? Do you expect that?
I don't know who will show up where for what, David. Our entire Republican delegation, including Gabe Evans, including Lauren Boebert, voted for the big bad bill.
Yep.
We are, of course, like most states, going to do what we can to save our rural hospitals. I mean, we can't make up for the federal loss, but we're going to try to. I certainly hope that the Republicans who voted for the bill don't take credit for state efforts to save the hospitals. I hope that those state efforts will be bipartisan. We're going to be working on that in the meantime. We're also going to do what we can to shore up the exchange, the health exchange. But again, if there's a 28% increase because of the loss of the federal tax credits, even if we can shave a few points off of that, it's still going to be a major increase for people. It could be 23, 24%. I mean, this is fundamentally a federal tax credit. There's only so much states can do.
Well, the bill is sort of interrelated with a bunch of other issues that include immigration. There's sort of like voting rights stuff, sort of distantly related. To talk first a little bit about immigration, what is your degree? To what degree do you want to cooperate with ICE's efforts in Colorado? And what is sort of over the line? And I ask this in a context where I've asked it of Governor Murphy and Governor Hochul and Governor Newsom. They've all had different answers to different degrees. Their answers trigger the ire of the MAGA people in Washington, D.C. Where are you on the ICE cooperation?
Yeah, I wish I got to hear those answers from my colleagues Phil and Kathy. Very thoughtful. I would have suspected, David, that they would have given, and I would give the same answer, but you can tell me if it's different. But from my perspective, full cooperation on criminal matters, no question, absolutely. Making Colorado safer is a major priority, and no cooperation from state resources on civil enforcement matters that are the responsibility of the federal government. So that's where I draw the line, and I think it's similar to other governors, but you know that more than me.
No, it is similar. On the issue of local law enforcement being, fill in the blank, encouraged, asked, pushed, whatever, to inquire as to immigration status. How much power do you have over directing local law enforcement to do or not to do that? And what is your position on that?
So it is not the job of local law enforcement to enforce the broken federal immigration laws. That's the job of the federal government. We keep our local law enforcement focused on fighting crime, keeping Colorado safe. They cannot be taken over by the federal government to enforce civil law. So that's where that goes. If the federal government is engaged in a criminal investigation to protect people, we have full cooperation with them, and that includes aligning with our local and state resources. But no, they can't just take over local law enforcement and take them off the beat and away from the streets and have them do something else instead, because we need them to protect Coloradans.
I've read that there are some county clerks in Colorado refusing to comply with this Department of Justice request for voter data for one of these so-called election integrity reviews. Do you agree with the county clerks that are saying we're not going to provide that data?
I'm not as close to that one, David. In all honesty, I haven't seen exactly what that request is and what's going on with that. We have a separately elected Secretary of State, and she'd be a good person to talk about that, as would some of the clerks themselves.
Generically, when you hear that the Trump administration is doing something called an election integrity review, does that make you think sounds really good, or does that make you suspicious?
Well, I don't know what they're seeking. Obviously, people can look up in our state, you can look up registered voter information. So that is, we do that in the campaign context, David, right? When you're contacting voters who voted in each election, who do you contact, and who's, the more likely person that might be a swing voter. So that data all exists on the political side. It's derived from information that is on the official side. Republicans have it just like Democrats have it. So I just don't know what if there's information that's being sought that's not publicly available or not. But if you've worked, and you have experience on the campaign side, a lot of that data is out there. Republicans, Democrats have it, use it to contact voters.
On the issue of housing, housing is interesting to me because whenever you look at the housing issues in a specific state and you talk to people working on the issue, there's sort of like a cluster of different ideas that are mentioned. There's sort of like the zoning side of it. There is subsidized housing. There are government programs. There's, do we want private equity more or less involved in owning or building? There's all these different kind of cluster of issues. One of the things that the data seems to consistently show is that however you can increase supply, it does help. And that even applies sometimes where it's like, oh, they're just building expensive condos that only a small percentage of people can afford. Well, if you increase the supply and the people who can afford those condos move there, it does alleviate some pressure somewhere else in the supply chain. It's not the perfect solution, but it just seems like supply is the number one path here. Do you agree with that? Because I know you've rolled out some housing initiatives of different kinds, first-time home buyers, et cetera. What's your philosophy on fixing housing?
Yeah, I agree completely. And I thought you articulated that very well. Supply of all kinds helps. Pricing is a function of supply and demand. The demand is high in Colorado. People want to live here. That's a good thing. But when we have artificial constraints on supply, it inflates the cost of housing. What are those artificial constraints? They're effectively local zoning and ordinances that don't let things be built, don't let homes be built, force multifamily homes to become smaller, not allow second homes or accessory dwelling units to be built on the same lots. So these are the kinds of things that artificially constrict supply for where people want to live. And as a result, prices go up. average home price in the Denver metro area now about $600,000. So we have been focused on systematically taking apart these artificial constraints on supply. We now allow, for instance, accessory dwelling units to be built by right. We've taken away the ability to impose parking requirements on new construction. Let a number of parking spots correspond to the demand of the market, right? If people want one parking spot with a 2,000-foot condo, that's great. If they want three, that's great, but don't have a requirement that they build so many that go unused if they're not needed. So we're really focused on with multifamily zoning by within half a mile of transit is another example. So these are the things that we've been focused on to just sort of allow homes and condos to be built to help meet the huge demand.
The data I was able to find about private equity ownership in Colorado is that 19% of apartment units are owned by private equity firms there. That's from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. And then there's another report about investors owning single family homes. That's estimated to be about a quarter. Now, investor might be someone who has one rental unit. It doesn't necessarily, it's investor is a much broader term than private equity firms. But if we focus in on the 19% of apartments owned by private equity firms, do you think Coloradans are well served by almost 1 out of 5 apartments being owned by private equity?
So, by the way, one of the things we do is apartments for rent and in Colorado, condos for purchase were out of whack because of some elaborate construction liability laws that we had. We fixed those. So we're hoping that more people build condos here. That's for ownership, great starter home, 300,000. There's also, of course, a role for rentals for apartments. And David, there's good and bad landlords of all types, right? I know people who have horror stories from their landlords that were not private equity. I know people who are tenants of one that's owned by a larger equity firm that are happy, not happy. I mean, there's good and bad landlords of all kinds. So I don't think you can really just connect the dots and say that they're all good or all bad of a certain type.
Well, I mean, I think that that's true, but I do feel the need to push back a little bit because when you look at the resource, when you have a bad individual landlord, the resources and the pockets, the depth of the pockets of the individual landlord who has a couple of apartments is going to be very different than what a private equity firm and its pockets can sort of bear or tolerate in terms of litigation or disproportionate power. So I don't know that it's necessarily the same. I mean, I think it's true that there are good and bad landlords, but there's really good scholarship about the state of apartments owned by private equity on average is objectively worse. The responsiveness and the debt collection tactics are extraordinarily more aggressive. You don't draw any distinction between just an individual
Well, I think
landlord and
you're
private equity?
asking the right question. So you ask the tenant, these are good questions. You say, look, when you have a problem, your water doesn't work or there's mold on your wall, is the response fast, right? That's what you need to ask. Of course, debt collection is another category. So, again, we should have more information about people kind of rating their landlords, but there are derelict landlords of all types and there's great landlords of all types. So I'd certainly be concerned if there was a concentration of ownership. For instance, if it was one private equity firm that owned 19%, I don't think that's the case. It's many, but there's
I
obviously
hear you.
competition among landlords, and some of them have a bad reputation, and tenants are less likely to sign up for those.
All right, let's I wanted to I'm curious to hear from my audience what they think about your perspective on that. Let's talk a little bit more broadly about the Democratic Party. Um, there's a very interesting anecdote in Jake Tapper's recent book about Governor Whitmer and the idea that in the chaos and concern about Joe Biden's reelection, which many felt was a bad idea as they spent time with him in 2023 and 2024, there was the idea of we've got to draft someone. Governor Whitmer's name came up, and this anecdote in the book is that she said, listen, I'm not doing that. If I do that and he wins, I am out essentially of the Democratic Party. I'm going to, she didn't use the term sort of like a sent to the leper colony, but this is sort of essentially what she was intimating. And I think the broader concern right now is that there is not really a cohesive plan to say, hey, we lost a lot in November of 24. This affects governors in a slightly different way because you're administrators in a way that, Lauren Boebert is not in Congress. I want to get your sense of what's the Democratic Party doing right now? What's the Democratic Party doing wrong? If you had to articulate what is the broader message to try to justify voters voting for Democrats in the upcoming midterms, where are you overall on this issue?
Well, that's a big question, right? But I would say, look, we should be the party of solutions that make people's lives better. And so when people are complaining about high healthcare costs, great way to show the differences. Republicans have increased healthcare costs by the big bad bill. We should also have a plan to decrease them, right? We're the party of education. In Colorado, we implemented free preschool and kindergarten. I think we should have universal preschool accessible nationally, right? Right, as a country. I'm doing a lot of work about getting better outcomes in education. How can we make sure that kids are prepared for success in the workforce and higher ed when they graduate? We should lead with policy ideas on that. Housing, we've talked about, right? Let's be the party of removing barriers and making more housing that people can afford close to job centers and where people can live. So, the party of ideas and ideas that speak to the real pain points that people have.
What do you think the policies you describe seem to have been in place in 2024? What didn't land in that last election as you assess it?
In place, what do you mean? They were, I mean, many Democrats supported them, of course. I think that,
They were
again,
in place as policy positions. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that.
yeah, I don't think that we witnessed the Democrats running on the power of those ideas. I was glad that Kamala Harris gave a nod towards housing reforms. That was she, I don't know if she emphasized that in her campaign, but she had the policy there, which was great. In fact, it was one of her first policies that she came out with was
Yeah.
housing, and I was broadly supportive of what she was doing there. I don't think we've had a candidate that's really run on universal preschool. Maybe it's in their platform somewhere, but the fact that I don't know and you don't know whether it was there or not probably
Yeah.
means they didn't focus on it. And then healthcare, again, there's an even bigger distinction to draw now from the Republican plan, which increases your premiums on the private market, and Democrats who want to reduce premiums and increase coverage.
Governor, before I let you go, what don't you like about being governor?
Well, being governor is a great job. You're really able to get things done, David. And I served in Congress for 10 years, and I really was honored to do that. But it's very slow and frustrating at times. Being governor, you're able to get a lot done. So rather than just talk about things like free preschool, got it done. Rather than talk about building out 100% clean energy by 2040, we're getting it done. We're going to be at 80% clean energy by 2030 in just 5 years. So it's really where the talking part of politics ends and the doing part of politics begins. And I love it.
Right, but my question was, what don't you like about it? I think it would be interesting to hear about what are the
Yeah.
frustrations of the office, and it doesn't have to be about individuals, but what are the things that because you are an administrator and the buck stops with you in ways that maybe it doesn't, like with a member of Congress, what are those areas that the average viewer might simply not know you deal with day to day?
I'd say the toughest part is, when you go to funerals, if a state trooper dies in the line of duty, meeting with victims who had a school shooting a few years ago in Douglas County and going to the hospital and, visiting the kids. So those kinds of things, funerals, visiting people in hospitals, those are not fun, but they're an important responsibility.
Yeah, no, that does not sound fun. We've been speaking with Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado. Governor, really appreciate your time and some of the insights into what's happening in your state today. Thank you.
Thank you.